learned about some one-step equations and we've done some examples and some practice with just basic one steps. Let's go ahead and move on to two steps. That means you're not just going to be doing one division or one multiplication or one addition or subtraction. You're going to be putting two steps together in order to solve for x. So these are our notes for the day. We're going to go ahead and look through the notes, the process of doing these two steps. We might have a couple examples, but then it will be up to you to solve these two steps. And then after two steps, we are going to move on to three-step and multi-step, and you'll get into these enormous equations that we are doing 5 or 6 steps, and you are going to be great at it. Let's take a look at these notes. So let's take a look at our first example here in our notes. We have two steps to these two steps equations. So our first step is we are going to undo addition and we're going to undo subtraction. So that is what we are going to undo first. This is the number that is not attached to the variable. We're going to see that in the example here in just a second. Step 2 is then to undo, what do you think? It's to undo multiplication or it's to undo division. If you think about PEMDAS, usually when you are doing PEMDAS, you are doing multiplication and division first and then addition and subtraction. However, when we are solving equations, we are doing PEMDAS backwards. So we are starting with addition and subtraction and then doing multiplication and division. We're undoing this PEMDAS. We're undoing these equations in order to solve for x. So let's look at this example here in our notes. I wrote the steps out to the sides. Remember, we're going to undo the subtraction by adding 2 to both sides. So let's take this step by step. I like to draw the line at the equal sign, just like we did with one-step equations. I see that there is an 4x right here. Remember, when that 4 is attached to the x, that means, or that indicates multiplication. So that says 4 times x minus 2 equals 22. So if we are following these rules and doing PEMDAS backwards, we are going to undo addition and subtraction first. I see that there is subtraction right here. It's a minus 2. So I think to myself, what is the opposite or the inverse of minus 2? Just like you were doing with one steps, the inverse of that minus 2 is to add 2. Remember, we're doing that to both sides of this equation. We're going to add 2 to both sides. And just like your one step, that minus 2 and that positive 2 cancel out. But now what I'm left with is a 4x equals, and on this side we have to do some math, 22 plus 2 is 24. So that was that first step right here. We undid the subtraction by adding 2 to both sides of that equation. My next step, I don't see any more addition and subtraction, but remember we talked about this says 4 times x. So now I can undo that multiplication. Now I'm at this step. We're going to undo our multiplication and division. So notice, now it's not just a one step. We have to go one more time to solve for x. So I need to divide, which is the opposite of multiply by 4. I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides, and let's see what we get. That 4's 0 out. I have x is equal to 24 divided by 4 leaves me with 6. I'm saying that x equals 6. However, I'm not just going to submit that. I always want to double check my work, right? It's so easy to double check. You're going to take that x equals 6 and you're going to substitute it back in where x is in the original. So I'm going to write my original equation down here. 4x minus 2 equals 22. And instead of that x, I'm going to substitute with a 6. And I have this, so let's see if this works out. Now that I don't have any x's over here when I'm solving, I am using PEMDAS the regular way. So the first thing I want to do is multiply. 4 times 6, which gives me 24. I still have that minus 2 equals 22, and 24 minus 2 is 22, So if you see what I end with here, 22 equals 22, that is correct. That is equal to each other. So that means that this x equals 6 is the correct answer. So just to sum that up, we're going to undo addition and subtraction first. Then you will undo your multiplication and division, and you will get your answer. Then you can substitute it back in to make sure your answer is correct. This is a 2-step. We added on another step just from those 1 steps. I do have 2 examples. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page with these notes. So let's go ahead and do 2 examples together. So here are our 2 examples just to make sure that we are on the same page. I'm going to draw my line on my first one, and it says 2y plus 1 equals 11. Look at that, it's a different letter. Make sure we know that when we're solving these, it's any letter, right? Any variable is good. So I'm going to undo my addition and subtraction first. So remember, this says 2 times y, so I'm going to leave that last, right? Multiplication's last. This is a plus 1, so I can get rid of that plus 1 first. The inverse to get rid of that plus 1 is to subtract 1 on both sides. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. To zero it out, that leaves us with 2y is equal to, and on the right side I have to do some math. 11 minus 1 is 10. I did my 1 step, but my y is still not by itself, so I have to go ahead and do that second step. 2 times y, the inverse or the opposite of times y is to divide, so I'm going to divide by 2. Divide by 2. And let's see what happens. The 2 0, I'm left with a y is equal to, and on the right I'm going to do my math again, 10 divided by 2 is 5. I get y equals 5. I'm going to take that extra 1 minute, it's only 1 minute guys, we're going to take that and we're going to substitute it back into the original to make sure that this is the right answer. So I have 2, instead of y I'm going to put 5 because that's what I got for my answer, plus 1 equals 11. Let's go ahead and solve it. When we're solving, we're using PEMDAS the normal way here. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 equals 11. 10 plus 1 equals 11, and sure enough, 11 equals 11, so that is true. My answer is absolutely correct. Ooh, I like this second example here. It has a fraction in it. We cannot be scared of those fractions. Let's go ahead and draw our line at the equal sign. Remember, I want to do addition and subtraction first, multiplication, division last. This fraction is telling me x divided by 3. That fraction bar I can represent with divided by, so x divided by 3. So obviously that I want to do that last. I want to get rid of that plus 2 first. So the inverse of plus 2 is minus 2, and I have to do that on both sides, so we're going to do that. It's going to zero out, and it's going to leave me on the left side with x divided by 3, or x over 3, equals, on this right side, we're going to do some math over here. 7 minus 2 is 5. So I have x divided by 3 equals 5. Again, this is a 2-step, so we got to keep going with this. This is x divided by 3. What is that inverse of dividing? The inverse of dividing is multiplying. So I'm going to multiply both sides, and we indicate that by putting parentheses around the whole thing, and we're going to multiply it by 3, multiply it by 3. So let's see. When I multiply this side by 3, the 3's cancel, so I'm left with x equals, on the right side I'm going to do my math, 5 times 3 is 15. I got a little ahead of myself there. So x equals 15. Let's always double check to make sure that is true. I'm going to take this answer and substitute it back in for where x was. So 15 over 3 plus 2 equals 7. Let's see if that is correct. I'm going to do my regular PEMDAS here, so my regular division problem. 15 divided by 3 is 5, plus 2 equals 7, and 5 plus 2 is absolutely 7, so you can see 7 equals 7. My answer is 15. Always take that extra 1 minute, 30 seconds to do that substitution back in to check your work. That was our notes for 2 steps. I hope you see how it builds onto 1 steps. It's the same type of process. We are just doing it twice. You're going to have some examples later on and some work for you to practice by yourself.